So let's remember, we're still in the summer of 2014 here with the videos. This was July 31st, 2014, I believe. And they're talking about the Israeli punitive operations in the Gaza Strip. You want to talk about like a conflict or a war. It's far too disproportionate to even use that kind of language, right? It's the corrective operation, or just even in this particular round of violence was just senseless, right? They're bringing up the question of okay, so something that was a little bit different about this particular round of violence in Gaza was that the American State Department actually indicated that it was uncomfortable with the scope of the I don't want to call it an Israeli reaction because I'm buying into the propaganda by doing so, but by the Israeli action. Was right, and that doesn't. I mean, normally what you get from the State Department, is a lot of, platitudes, a lot of statements about, Israel, and if you're lucky, you might get, something about, trying to play a neutral role or something, right? The idea of of the United States, in any way pushing back against Israeli behavior in that area is unusual, and that is something that in the long run may turn out to be unique to the Obama administration. I would not expect Hillary Clinton to carry on with any of that, nor would I expect Donald Trump to. For all the rhetoric, Trump might be the most violent Zionist that we've seen yet. If for no other reason than his anti-Muslim perceptions, and I mean his anti-Muslim rhetoric is real, right? So, but on top of that, his daughter is a Jew now. His daughter converted to Judaism. They're very, like, as a household, as a unit, this is a very pro-Israel individual. So to suggest he's a Nazi is not in line with the evidence, right? Maybe a little bit of anti-Muslim sentiment, certainly anti-Mexican sentiment, a lot, right? But white supremacism doesn't add up because they're so openly and so blatantly pro-Zionist. That's something that I would expect to see from a Trump administration. I would also expect to see that from a Clinton administration. So Obama may, he's often cited as the most pro-Israel president of all time, and if you look at things, if you measure things in certain ways, it's true. But he has been a little bit more willing to express displeasure, however important or meaningful you want that to be, or you interpret that to be. It has been a little bit louder under Obama than really under anybody that I can think of. If you consider that the current American policy towards Israel was largely constructed by Henry Kissinger, I think the only person that really comes close to Obama on the issue is Carter, right? It's been very, very pro-Israel ever since, right? And there's reasons for that, but that's not what this is about. I actually think those reasons are rational, whether we like them or not. They're borderline evil, but they're rational, unfortunately. Or at least rational if your perception is if you see America as the great Satan, and you're willing to revel in it, like not just acknowledge it and accept it, but revel in it and say, yeah, we're the great Satan and fuck you. We're gonna act like it, right? If you take that perspective, then what they do in the Middle East makes perfect sense, right? It might not be the most rational thing in the long run. In the long run, it might hurt them. It might destroy them, right? I mean, in the long run, oil is not the way to go, right? But there's in the short term, they want to be the badass. They want to be the the grand poobah. This divide and conquer that they use is entirely rational. And what the United States does with Israel, there really isn't another option. I'm going to change my battery just a sec. We'll get to the point of this soon. Okay, so in light of the fact that the State Department is expressing a little bit of criticism here, which is unusual, the reporters in the room, this is a State Department briefing. They do this every day, or every weekday. Almost every weekday, anyways. The reporters in the room, and we'll get to know a little bit of them. I've got, what? Is that August, September, October, November, December, 5 times. We're going to go through about 100 of these. They're about an hour each. We're going to be watching these for a while, right? Yeah, and we'll get to know these reporters a little bit. I mean, I've certainly got to know them. I know who they are, and I know the spokespeople fairly well as well. So yeah, they're pointing out that it's a little bit curious that you're actually expressing a little bit of criticism. You're saying this is disproportionate, this is unacceptable. They bombed some UN facilities. Specifically, and they're saying this is no good. You shouldn't be doing this. They're stepping back from outright condemnation, but they're expressing this is not acceptable. And these kinds of language when you're talking about diplomacy, between state actors, the precise language that you use is more important than may come across in day-to-day language, right? But what the reporters are suggesting is that, wait a second, this is kind of inconsistent, right? And she's pushing back and saying, well, we don't really think that, let's be clear about what the inconsistency is. What they're saying is that it seems to be inconsistent that you're criticizing them for their behavior and yet you're providing them with weapons. It seems to be that if you were really serious about your criticism, you would stop providing them with weapons, which, is relevant or is reasonable on some level, except that it's absurd to suggest that the Americans are going to pull out or are going to drop their support for Israel, right? Whatever influence they have over Israel, stopping the sale of weapons to them is not going to be the way to have that play itself out. In fact, what we've learned over the last 50 years is that when you start doing that kind of thing, these states, not only do they not modify their behavior, but they very quickly realign, right? So if you want to stop selling weapons to Israel, don't be surprised when they start buying them from Beijing. Or even start selling them to Beijing. Or start buying them from Russia, or you start seeing Russian military bases show up around Tel Aviv. Don't be surprised, because they're not that good allies, right? These countries, you gotta look at it both ways, right? Look what the United States does to the area. Constant chaos, right? Constant division. And then you wonder why they're looking for the closest, for the easiest way out, and we'll take it if it comes. So, like I say, this strategy in the long run is unstable. It has no outcome but eventual collapse, presuming that somebody can challenge American hegemony at some point in the future. But in the short term, so long as that hegemony exists, there's no way out of it, right? And to suggest that you can just stop selling weapons to Israel is ridiculous. So I mean, it may seem inconsistent on the face of it, but it's a very it's not a very educated analysis. And the particular reporter that asked that question, like I said, I've watched a lot of these, and that reporter is not so smart. She asks a lot of really stupid questions, and it's the kind of smart, like, she thinks she's smart, right? It's that kind of cluelessness that's particularly frustrating. So she thinks she's asking a really smart question. She thinks she's, pointing out a really, dour contradiction. And, she's, laughing about it and, the whole thing, right? Well, if you really did not support them, you wouldn't sell them weapons, right? And it's true on, like I say, it's a very surface reading. The only way you can make that argument is if you have really no understanding of anything that's happening in the region. And like I say, I've heard enough from this individual to know that she has no understanding. And that's something that's gonna come up a lot with these talks as well, is I'm gonna be pointing out that what's the biggest problem here? I mean, you can't blame the State Department for lying to you, right? You can't, unless you are the most naive idiot. You cannot blame the State Department for lying to you. But you can blame the media, and specifically the companies that send these reporters out, for not doing their job, right? It is the State Department's job to lie to you. It's the media's job to hold them to account for that. And the failure here is really not in the State Department. You have to expect them to lie to you. The failure here is in the media's inability to even understand what's happening, right? We have these perceptions of the media as these, the media as this leviathan, right? But I mean, I've stated a few times over the last few weeks that, or a few months, that I don't have a lot of fear of government surveillance, because I don't see it as this centralized bureaucracy or this really smooth running thing. I see it as a lot of bureaucrats that aren't able to function, that really can't do their job right. And you might associate that with a certain kind of pro-market perspective. I don't. I think that government and business suffer from the same basic problems, and the issue is not whether it's a government or a private company. The private versus public thing doesn't. I don't really think it makes any difference. The issue is the nature of a corporation, and a corporation or a government. They're basically the same thing, in terms of the way that they're structured, right? When you have these great big organizations, and they end up delegating all of these things to all these different people, you end up with mass incompetence, because everything is too far from a locus, right? It would make more sense to break everything apart and have things operating. I mean, I don't even want to talk. Again, you could very easily misunderstand that, right? You could think I'm talking about, trying to make the market more efficient or something. But what I'm actually talking about more is putting things more in the hands of people, right? Taking things, breaking down the structures of hierarchy, so that we have more horizontal concepts of power, right? The point being that, I think from watching this, that a big part of the reason that that we're not able to hold our elected officials to account is because our journalists don't understand what they're saying. They send journalists to these briefings that don't have any idea of politics in the Middle East. They don't have any idea of the way these countries operate. They don't have any idea of the broader, geopolitical implications. They're completely clueless as to something that they should have done research on. And the system is so broken that it can't fix it. So it's not some media conspiracy where Fox is different, right? Fox is the one counterexample, and ironically, it's because it's run efficiently. Okay, but these media organizations, they get cast aside as liberal, whatever you want to say liberal means. Um, all I see is incompetence. I don't see a conspiracy. I don't see this collusion between politicians and media. All I see is that the media is unable to do its job properly. And so she's asking this question, and she thinks it's a really smart question. The spokesperson here, her name is Mary Harf. Um, she's I believe she's the undersecretary or the under spokesperson. But she does a much better job than the official spokespeople ever do. She's a lot tougher, a lot more stone-faced. She's out of all I've seen a bunch of people do this, and she's kind of the best at it from the systems perspective. She's very stone-faced, and she provided by far the more intelligent response, which is that no, of course, that whether we sell these armaments to Israel really has nothing to do with whether they use them or not, right? And if we stop selling it to them, that's not going to stop them from behaving the way they are. Because they could buy them from somewhere else, or they could even make them themselves. We can say we don't like this and try to put pressure down. But this idea that we're going to stop the slaughter by ending arms sales, all we're going to do by trying that approach is blow up our policy in the Middle East. And if you don't like our policy in the Middle East, that's fine. But there's not much chance you're going to convince any State Department to follow through on that. I do have an actually constructive suggestion, though. And that is the point of this. It's been pointed out by several people that it seems to be that these periods of slaughter coincide with periods where Israel needs to get rid of surplus weaponry. Because things go out of date, they become obsolete. There's aspects in the contracts that are time-based. It may be the case that boycotting them is not going to help anything. But there are certain things that could be done to help Israel dispose of its old weapons. So, for example, the United States could, when the United States brings in new armaments, they could buy back the old ones, so that Israel doesn't need to get rid of them. Some of the contracts could be worded a little bit differently to remove incentives for Israel to eliminate its stockpile or clear out its stockpile to make space for new weapons. That might have been or in fact, I think it's quite certain that that's what the reporter was trying to say. That's what the reporter wanted to say and wanted to get at, but just didn't have the education and understanding of the situation. Was just not well enough informed to articulate. So I mean that's we are going to have many of these situations where I'm providing some kind of constructive solution to things. I think that something that any administration might want to take seriously, right? Because I think it is well understood that it's a significant factor, right? There's a new generation of shrapnel or something that's coming in. Israel only has so much space, and they don't want it to end up in the wrong hands or whatever else. So they got to get rid of it. And how do they get rid of it? They use it. So how do you prevent that? Is you find a way to take it out of there, right? It's a little disconcerting that nobody is thinking of these things, but I guess that's what I'm here for, huh?